Sorry about your barn.
You're listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
There was a kid in 6th grade who he begged his mom, and she bought him the storybook of Return of the Jedi. This was about 2 weeks before the movie came out. And this kid, I remember it vividly. He brought that book to school, and he was offering, he wasn't charging for it, which he could have definitely made a few quarters. But he was offering if anybody wanted to thumb through it because it gave away the whole movie. It gave away the whole movie. And I remember looking at it and running the other direction because I wanted to be surprised on the big screen. I had put, at this point, 6 years into Star Wars, and it was all about to come to an end the summer of 1983 with Return of the Jedi. And I didn't want it spoiled by that guy's storybook. Now, I did look at it afterwards, because, everybody got one. There was, the only way to bring the movie home back then was the toys, and, of course, novels and books and storybooks. And I had one that when R2-D2 beeps, you turn the page. And I had all those, and I would relive these movies again and again and again. But there was that brief moment where I could have seen what was going to happen to my favorite characters before they unfurled on the big screen, before the film unspooled. And I remember, this is, I know it's hard to believe now. I mean, EndGame is probably, the closest thing. But EndGame is on every screen at theaters. They built these multiplexes in the 90s with 25 screens, and they said they were doing that so they could show smaller films. They actually tried to get us to believe that, theaters 7 and 8 will be reserved for independent filmmakers, and so sure it will. I went to 2 or 3 theaters this round, and every single screen was playing EndGame to squeeze as many people in as possible. And, that's only possible now that films are delivered digitally, because, when I was a teenager, a young kid going to the movies, sometimes if you got there early enough, and Lord knows I did, you could actually see them delivering the film canisters to the theater. They'd walk in with these big metal cans with big padlocks on them. And then, they were limited to how many screens they could put it on by how many physical copies they had of the film. That's not the case anymore, because you just hit copy and paste and you wait for it to copy itself. Gosh, how long does a high definition copy of EndGame take to copy and paste? It must take a week, But you do that on a bunch of supercomputers, and you have enough of these to email them everywhere through the fiber optic cables, and everybody gets to see it. But way back when, they weren't on a lot of screens. Even Return of the Jedi, which at the time was the number one, the most massive movie release of all time up until that point, there were only a limited number, finite number of screens it could be on. And I begged my mother. It came out, Wednesday? And I got to see it Friday, because I was like, somebody at school is going to spoil this for me. Somebody at school is going to go see it, and they're going to be the coolest kid on campus, and everyone's going to gather around as they regale us with the tales of the Jedi and what happened in the movie and the fate of Luke Skywalker, and did Han Solo make it? Do they rescue him? What happens with Darth Vader? I mean, these were huge questions, and they kept us kids hopping, This is all we talked about on the schoolyard was Return of the Jedi. There were kids that were into sports. I knew a guy that was, this guy Chris, Chris Wright was into hockey in the biggest way, and he always talked hockey. And I would just listen and go, Did you know that Luke Skywalker's new lightsaber is green? Like, sure, Jeff. Like, I was a huge, colossal nerd about Star Wars. And the only modern-day equivalent is Game of Thrones. This is a show that it's been on it was on 8 seasons. It was groundbreaking. George R.R. Martin's novel series. George R.R. Martin was a TV writer back in the day. He wrote episodic television. And I think, if I remember right, he was tired of people telling him that his scripts were unfilmable, and he had to change them to make them filmable. So when he got his own moment, he published books that he said at the time were unfilmable. He's like, screw you, Hollywood. I have my own universe here, and it's unfilmable, so they'll always be just my books. And then HBO came calling, and, you know, they backed up a Brinks truck full of money for him to get the rights to these things. And, you know, a lot of people don't know they actually produced a pilot that was deemed unwatchable. And instead of airing it and crossing their fingers, HBO doubled down, went back, and let them make another pilot, which I appreciate. You know, that's the Back to the Future syndrome. You know, you make the movie with Eric Stoltz, it doesn't work out, you ask to make the movie again. So they made the pilot of Game of Thrones again. No one in the public has ever seen that original pilot. It's floating somewhere out there. I'd love to see how bad it actually is. But Game of Thrones premieres, and I know a lot of people watched it. I was not among them. I don't have any paid channels. I can't afford them. So I don't have them. But as a guy at work, Daniel, he watches everything. Daniel's the guy at work that if you don't see it, Daniel's going to tell you about it and spoil it. And that's not a bad thing, you know, because a lot of times I go to him, I go, did you see X? Yeah, I saw it. Well, how was it? Well, you know, and I always go, spoilers don't bother me. I've grown up. I'm okay to see a movie. And if it's spoiled for me, I don't freak out, you know, because as a writer, I'm taking it apart in ways you can't imagine. You know, I'm dissecting the film as I watch it. And so Daniel was he's the first guy to tell me how great Harry Potter was, the book series. And when I finally got it, he's like, I told you. And I'm like, yeah, it's fantastic. So one weekend when I was living in Riverside, the cable company had a free HBO weekend because Game of Thrones was starting, right? So I think it was season 3 that was starting, if I remember right. So they were letting you watch for free, and they put all of the first 2 season episodes on demand. So I remember telling Rachel, look, I'm going to try this out and see. The first episode, fantastic. You know, it had Sean Bean in it. I love Sean Bean. Had a bunch of cast of people. I don't know who these people are, but holy cow, this movie's this TV show looks really expensive. They have these huge sets. They have all these characters, and they have this lore and mythology, and you're expected to, you know, darn it, keep up, or we're leaving you by the wayside. And I appreciated that. I appreciated the fact that, for the most part, the show was made with a sense of intelligence. Not that, you know, I'm not one of those who go, well, you have to be smart to understand it. If you didn't understand it, you're just not very smart. No, I'm not saying that. I mean, that's so pretentious. People who say that need to be cast into a pit. No, I'm saying that sometimes even I would have to rewind things to go, oh, okay, they're making a reference to this, to that. I get that. Oh, that makes sense now. And I'll be honest, for the first, oh my gosh, 5 seasons of this show, I didn't even know most of the characters' names. I would go, you know, the guy that got his hand chopped off, or the evil queen lady, or her son, or, you know, Peter Dinklage. Like, I didn't know any of these people, right? And so I binge watched that first weekend. I was, you know, caught in the first episode there, and I just swallowed whole the rest of the episodes. And the sad part is that after devouring that 3rd season, there's such a huge gap in HBO shows. I was like, oh, I'm all caught up, and it's going to be another year or 2 years or whenever the next season starts. And I remember, I'm okay with that. I remember thinking I'm okay with that. You know, when The Empire Strikes Back ended with Han Solo frozen in carbonite and Luke wondering, is Darth Vader really my father? We had to wait 3 years. 3 freaking years until the next installment to figure out what happened, to find out what happened. You know, to collect the next batch of trading cards and action figures and bedding and birthday supplies, right? So, I'm constantly comparing Game of Thrones to Star Wars because of, I think, its specialness, its care, its attention to detail, its world building. You know, these are shows that do not take place on Earth. These are shows that take place somewhere in another realm, you know, and they're so well realized that you're just drawn into them. They're just so well done. The characters are great. You sympathize with the characters. And, you know, just when you figure you know the course of the show, they kill somebody. And for the most part, that person stays dead. And that's unheard of in episodic television. You know, they don't kill main characters. Or if they do, they've already figured out how they're going to bring him back via flashback or some other gimmick. Or he walks out of the shower and says it was all just a dream, right? Back when Star Wars was in production, the first 3 films, there was no Entertainment Tonight, there was no Access Hollywood, there was no internet, there was only magazines and the occasional news broadcast. So the Star Wars movies were made in a vacuum. I wasn't privy to everything that went on set with the Star Wars movies. And the people in them, for the most part, didn't make a lot of other movies. You know, Mark Hamill made The Big Red One with Lee Marvin, and he made Corvette Summer with Annie Potts, and Harrison Ford made Hanover Street and The Frisco Kid, and eventually would make Blade Runner and, of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but that's the tail end. But these actors were only in these shows during that time. And for the most part, I know Game of Thrones people do make movies, but for the most part, they're kept sequestered in these exotic locales to make these epic stories. And we don't see a lot of making of. They're opening it up now with a full documentary and these attached mini documentaries that sort of dissect the show that you just watched. But for the most part, for the main run of Game of Thrones, they were made like Star Wars in a vacuum. And there's something about that makes them more palpable, more tangible, more real. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter. And the Game of Thrones people don't have Facebook pages. So I don't see Sophie Turner having a Starbucks. I don't see, Arya Stark Maisie at the mall with her friends. I don't see any of that. I only see the show. It's very pure. And for that reason, Game of Thrones always has held a lofty position in my ranking of pop culture because it feels real. And it also feels not real, but also feels a lot like Star Wars. And that's such a good thing. That's such a good feeling, There are bad guys. There are good guys. There are people faced with moral dilemmas. There are characters that turn, that you hate in the beginning, and then they turn into really good guys, like Jaime Lannister. And characters you didn't know about suddenly rise to the top. Is Jon Snow the main character? I don't know. They're banishing him to the wall, and then there's this idea that this woman has dragon eggs, and then the dragons hatch and they're little dragon lizards, and there's zombies on the other side of the wall. Like, I don't know what's happening, but I am enjoying every single minute of it. It's not hyperbole to say that I consider Game of Thrones the finest television show that has ever aired because they care about the viewer. It's smart as hell. They kept those actors, for the most part, confined to those roles for the run, which is not easy. I know they all made little this and that, but nothing like major. Like nothing huge. Like Benedict Cumberbatch, the minute he got famous in Sherlock, was in every movie that ever came out. Who's that guy? Oh, that's Benedict Cumberbatch. Oh, that guy from Sherlock? Yeah, he's in every movie now. It's part of his contract. Oh, he's taken over for Jude Law, who used to be in every movie. Oh, so Game of Thrones occupied this rare air of such status and such craftsmanship, and HBO should be applauded for basically giving these guys, the two Ds who made it, DB and David, a blank check to make the show you need to make. And, you know, I know it got headlines in the beginning because there was a lot of nudity. A lot of women are naked. They go to the brothel and everybody's naked. You know, there was male nudity. There was girl on girl nudity, girl and guy nudity, brother and sister nudity. And, you know, that doesn't really do anything for me. I'm not titillated by that. If it services the story, then that's great. Like Littlefinger is shown to be a terrible person because he trades in secrets and he runs all the brothels. That makes him a bad guy. Okay, Littlefinger, my favorite character in the whole show. He's the guy that sets the whole plot in motion. He's the reason Sean Bean's character, Ned Stark, leaves Winterfell and goes to King's Landing. You won't find that out for many seasons, but Littlefinger's the catalyst for the whole series. Because if Ned doesn't go to King's Landing, we don't have a story, right? And I got caught up in this show, and just when you think Sean Bean, a major motion picture actor from Patriot Games and Lord of the Rings and a million other movies and National Treasure, he gets beheaded. They actually chop his head off. Nobody saves the day when Ned Stark gets killed. And that's the first indication that what you're watching is a little different and a little better, because there are real consequences to your actions. And when characters die, good luck. They are dead. Now, I was always under the impression that they started the show off very slow. You know, we're just getting into the water. We're letting ourselves get acclimated to it. Now, it does open with a White Walker. So you can't say that, well, the supernatural stuff and the monster stuff came out of left field. No, they're letting you know right at the beginning. But then they're going to dial back on it to let you immerse yourself in the human aspect of the story. And they're not going to bring dragons and witches and magic into it until later. And by the time they do it, you're already so hooked on the show that you wouldn't even entertain the idea of not continuing to watch. It's not like Walking Dead, because I was a huge Walking Dead fan. And then the minute I realized, oh, they're never going to resolve these stories. They're always going to ruin whatever society they create, have to move on and start over. And I went, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And I gave up Walking Dead because they're never going to propel the story. And having Rick get kidnapped by some scientist in a helicopter is not propelling the story. That's creating another spin-off. And the last thing I want is more spin-offs. Just tell me a pure story the first time around. If you want to do it again in a sequel, that's great. But, you know, that's what killed me on comic books, was crossovers. The story continues in another issue of another magazine. Well, I don't buy that one. Well, you have to if you want to keep the story going. Oh, well, I'm not interested anymore. I can't keep up with 6 titles, and I'm not going to. So, Game of Thrones was pure for years and years. They've not done a spin-off yet. They've not done a prequel yet. I'm sure those are all in the works. I know for a fact the prequel is. It seemed as if Arya Stark was getting a spin-off at the end of the show, but we'll get to that in a second. So, like I said, this is a show made with quality and care and just high-end filmmaking. You know, nothing done on the cheap. If there's one soldier and you need 30, Then there's 30 soldiers. Here's 50. Here's 100 men on horseback. And I'm sure a lot of it's digital, but you still got to pay for that. To make it look photoreal, you have to pay for that. And Game of Thrones paid for that again and again and again. And there were moments where you're holding your breath. The story is so good. And I think Game of Thrones' greatest accomplishment is creating some of the most reviled bad guys in the history of storytelling. You know, because in Harry Potter, Voldemort's a bad guy, but he doesn't really do anything. He sits in a chair and finally at the end waves his wand and he kills Cedric Diggory. Fine. Oh, no, he doesn't do it. Wormtail does. But Voldemort never really does. They talk about everything that he did. Oh, he tortured Neville Longbottom's parents. When was that? Oh, it's before we started. Oh, what has he done now? Oh, he who must not be named. He feasts on the blood of unicorn. Are you sure that's not Quirrell? Boy, you're a right nerd. Yes, I am. Voldemort doesn't do anything really bad. You know, Thanos, great villain. Great villain. You know, because he's sympathetic. Because there's a part of you that goes, well, maybe Thanos is right. But Game of Thrones villains are right up there with Hannibal Lecter, Darth Vader, and some of the other greatest film villains of all time. Because these guys are, you hate them. Joffrey, man, every time he's on screen, that actor's so good, you want to reach in and throttle him. And when they killed him, they invented Ramsay Bolton, and Bolton was even worse than Joffrey to Somerset because he's raping Sansa and doing terrible things to Theon. These villains show up and they're just so good, and because the show is made for adults, the stuff they do is so vile. It's not kiddie stuff. You know, it's not kiddie stuff at all. This is horrible people doing horrible things to other people, and you hate them for it. And through it all, two characters remain steadfast. Jon Snow is the steadfast rock of the show, anchor guy who always tries to do the right thing. And Daenerys Targaryen is singularly focused on she's going to reclaim the Iron Throne. Because when the show starts off, she's property. She's being moved back and forth by her brother. You know, when they kill him with the golden crown, man, that is brutal. But she's always remained... She knew what it was like to be subjugated, to be used. So when she comes across people that are doing that, she has to strike back, you know. And she is going to someday cross the ocean, and reclaim the Iron Throne. Now, we had no idea that it would be 7 seasons until that happened. And there were many moments I'd go, why doesn't she just get in a boat and sail and start this thing? Let's have a battle and see what happens. Like, no, we're building up to that. Holy cow, are you building up to that? And they were also, the producers, up against, there's only so many books written. And eventually, they're going to reach the end of George R.R. Martin's published works, and they're going to have to make it up when they get to the ending, because George has not finished the ending, right? He's still working on them. And they're his stories to tell. I get that. He can take as long as he wants, and when he finally reveals it, it'll be great. But they were, the producers, under the gun, because eventually they got right up into the book ends, and now they have to keep telling the story. And I think that's when things started to unravel for Game of Thrones. It's a great show. It will go down in history as one of the greatest, if not the greatest television show ever, and I don't say that lightly. And we're at a weird juncture in pop culture where you're not allowed to criticize the things that you watch and intake, unless what you're going to do is shower praise beyond measure on them. And I'm not sure how this happened. This is a very strange moment. So if you're one of those folks who cannot take anybody criticizing the thing you like, it's time to turn me off. you can turn the show off. I've just given you a fantastic review of the show and what I think of it, and you can go your merry way. You've spent 20 plus minutes with me, and it's great. But we're going to criticize and talk about what happened in the last 2 seasons of this show. And social media has ruined this world, because since I was able to walk and talk, I have talked to my friends about movies and TV shows and books and what's good and what's bad, and I'll tell you my story, you tell me your story, and we'll meet in the middle. Oh, you liked it? Oh, that's cool. I didn't care for it. Oh, cool, man. You didn't like the part where the guy did this? No, I didn't care for it. Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, it is too bad, because you make it sound great. But we've always been able to criticize pop culture. That's just what you do. You critique the things that you watch. And if we're at a point in society where you're not allowed to do that anymore, I'm checking out. I won't be a part of that. And I think it started with that stupid Ghostbusters remake. Sony decided to remake Ghostbusters, which is in and of itself a bad idea. Because I'm looking at my Ghostbusters collection. I have a huge wall in my room of nothing but Ghostbusters stuff. I have the Proton Pack from the original. I have the Proton Pack from the remake. I have multiple Stay Puft Marshmallow Mans. I have the Firehouse. I have 5 or 6 Ecto-1s and a bunch of figures of all the Ghostbuster characters. So, yeah, I'm a big Ghostbusters fan. And unless you're going to do Ghostbusters 3... there was really no need to go to the Ghostbusters universe. And when Bill Murray said, I'm not interested, then it's okay. I mean, did you not hear the last episode I did? It's okay for franchises to end. We don't seem to believe that anymore. There's another Men in Black coming out. Like, everything old is new again and will continue to be new until we all die. Disney's remaking every one of their cartoons as quote-unquote live-action movies. And they put these things out, and if they're bad, they're bad. And the Ghostbusters movie is bad. It's a bad script. It has nothing to do with the talent of those funny women that are in it. It has to do with they just don't understand the material. Paul Feig's a fantastic filmmaker. His episodes of The Office are among the very best of any television show that's aired, comedy-wise. The Dinner Party might be the greatest sitcom episode ever. Paul Feig directed it. He's a fantastic director. So it's not the direction. It's the script. It all starts with a script, man. Putting words on paper costs nothing. You sit in your house and you put words on paper, you have a sip of soda or something, and you hammer it out, and then you read it, and then you fix it. And you write it again. And then you write it again. I mean, this is what I do. You write it again. Oh, you're tired of looking at it? Who cares? Write it again. And what he did was he hammered out this first draft with his writing partner. They took it to the set, and then they improvised, which meant that what they wrote, as thin as it was, didn't even make it to the screen. But what Sony did, and it's all Sony, it's the Sony social media people. They went on this weird attack, and they created accounts. And don't tell me they didn't do it, because I know Sony did it, because Sony's the company that had fake reviews on their movies, where it would say, 4 stars, Edgar Bronfman from the Toronto Bee. And you're like, the newspaper doesn't exist, and the critic doesn't exist. Oh, sorry. We wanted the box to reflect a 4-star review. But you didn't get a 4-star review. No. Well, that's lying. Yeah. So you're just okay with that? Yep. Okay. Well, there's Sony in a nutshell, folks. So they went on social media, and they got this weird campaign started and riled people up that if you didn't like the Ghostbusters movie, you didn't like women. What? I don't like women? What are you talking about? Every waking moment that I've had since the age of 12 and a half has been about women, okay? I love women. I love women on the big screen. I love women on the small screen. I love women in plays. I don't care who the lead is, if it's man, woman, or vegetable or mineral. I had a poster of Ripley on my wall from Aliens for years. I had every Princess Leia figure. Dana Barrett is just as much a part of the Ghostbusters as Peter Venkman is. So this idea that if you didn't like the Ghostbusters movie, you were some sort of misogynist, I was frankly baffled. And yeah, I'm sure there were some mean people on Twitter. Guess what? That's why I'm not on Twitter. I think Twitter's a wasteland of unnecessary opinions. And yes, I understand the irony of that while I'm giving my opinion on a podcast, but everybody got their thing. But I rarely go on here and tear people's projects down. Unless they're really bad. I mean, have you ever seen the remake of The Stepford Wives? It's arguably the worst movie I've ever seen. And a lot of people worked on that. And it was directed by Frank Oz, a man I admire beyond measure. So this idea that, well, you don't like the movie because you're a so-and-so, that Sony invented that. And it has taken hold. And now if you don't get behind something 100%, get in line, man. You're the problem. They have flipped it on to the viewer. Where now, if the restaurant serves you a burnt meal, you're the bad guy for not eating it. When, oh God, I want to curse so bad. When the F did this happen? And how did we allow it to happen? Pop culture doesn't control us. We control pop culture. We resoundingly reject the pop culture things that are made shoddily and just to make a buck. And I'll give you an example. Do you remember the movie Megaforce? No, you don't, because it's a terrible movie. Horrible movie. I wouldn't wish that movie on my worst enemy. We reject it. Big budget movies. Dick Tracy? I know, I just was reading a blog the other day where a guy said he thought Dick Tracy was the worst movie ever made. We rejected Dick Tracy out of pop culture. I think it's a masterpiece of filmmaking, but we rejected it as a whole. It was released, it didn't make a lot of money, and it was never heard from again. The Rocketeer, John Carter. Boy, I'm only doing Disney movies, huh? There are other examples. Speed 2, Men in Black 2 and 3. These are movies that were resoundingly rejected by pop culture. And we didn't reject Men in Black 2 because we don't like Will Smith. We love Will Smith. We reject it because it's a bad movie. You know, Men in Black 2 suffered because of 9/11. The whole ending had to be reworked, so the movie doesn't really make a lot of sense. But we're allowed to reject it, and it wasn't that long ago. You know, there was a movie that came out called Battleship. A lot of people worked on it. Liam Neeson was the star. Rihanna was in it. This is a huge budget movie. No one even remembers it because it was resoundingly rejected by pop culture. And nobody said, look, you don't like Battleship because you don't like board games. What? Well, you're obviously a board game phobe. No. It's a dumb movie where they shoot giant pegs at each other like the game. Oh, well, I didn't realize it was bad. Yeah, it's bad. Liam Neeson looks embarrassed to be in it, and it steals the plot from Battlestar Galactica. Oh, but that's okay. You keep calling me names because I didn't like your stupid movie. This is all manufactured by studios. You know, if you don't like Captain Marvel, you're the problem. You know, I've watched some video essays on YouTube about why they didn't like Captain Marvel. I didn't get to see it, so I don't have an opinion. But the people that didn't like it were told, well, you don't like women. How's that possible? Okay, let me ask you a question. Are there really people on the planet that don't like women? That reject over 50% of the population? These people sound stupid. These are not people I want to hang out with. Well, I didn't like it. Why? Because there was a woman in it. There's a woman in practically everything. There's a woman right there. I don't like her. Well, you're an idiot. I don't know those people. I can't imagine who they are. And if there are people on Twitter pretending to be like that, then they're even dumber. But we're talking about such a tiny percentage of the population. What I'm talking about are people who go on social media and pretend to hate women. They call them, what, incels? This is like less than 1/100% of the population. Yet the media talks about them as if it's everybody you know. Like there are just people everywhere walking around angry at women all day. I don't know anybody like that. I wouldn't want to know anybody like that. And I certainly wouldn't let anybody like that define what movies I get to see. Instead, I just talk about merit. Is it a good movie? Doesn't matter who stars in it or what it's about. Is it good? Is it made good? Do they understand the filmmaking process and character development? You know, I'm in the midst right now of writing book 5 of my book series. I'm about 250 pages from ending my entire series, which will comprise 5 books and about 2,500 pages. And I'm agonizing over every page because it has to be perfect, and more importantly, it has to be logical. And if I try to get my characters to do something that's out of character with who they are, they simply won't do it. I'll write it and it'll look weird and I'll have to backspace it out. That's characters. They tell you what they're going to do because you've created them and you've imbued you've enhued them with certain characteristics and foibles and strengths and weaknesses. And if you try to do something that doesn't feel I'm like twisting a Rubik's Cube, then the pieces fall out. You have to put them back together. And you have to keep turning the right way until the colors come about. You can't force it. You can't force it. And you can't do things just because you're running the other direction. Yeah, I'm talking about Last Jedi. Boy, Last Jedi was the latest example of, well, it's a big studio picture, and it was made by a lot of people, and if you don't like it, you're the problem. How am I the problem? I idolize Luke Skywalker. He's my childhood hero. He is the guy that I wanted to be forever. And you made him a hermit who's angry at the world and won't go save his friends. That's Last Jedi in a nutshell. Does that sound logical? Or is that subverting expectations? You see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I am not trying to be a jerk here. The people who loved Force Awakens, I said on my show, I'm jealous of you. I want to love Star Wars like I did when I was a kid, but I can't because they make these weird choices. You know, George Lucas made a weird choice. He put Ewoks in it because he wanted to sell toys. Ralph McQuarrie walked off the picture. The number one visual artist for Star Wars, who created the look and feel of the universe, walked off the picture because he wasn't comfortable with selling teddy bears. That's chutzpah, my friends. But that was the point where the filmmakers lost his way. It was a story he always wanted to tell. I get it. It was supposed to be a Planet of Wookiees, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to sell more teddy bears. They created mystique around them. The first Star Wars card backs that came out for Return of the Jedi, the Ewoks were covered in black splotches so you couldn't see them. Then they were finally revealed. Ewoks! Oh my God! But that was about a primitive force rising up and defeating the Grand Empire. It was the story that Lucas always wanted to tell. He just sort of, fudged around the edges of how he told it. Force Awakens was a calculated effort to reboot Star Wars for a new generation. I totally get it. It's what I would have done. I understand. If you wanted new stories, that's what the prequels were for. They were all new stories. Here I am rambling on and on about Star Wars again. I got to get out of this mess. We've gone down a rabbit hole. Who cares? A tall green rabbit named Jax. We've gone down that rabbit hole. That's a reference for all you major nerds out there. So, Game of Thrones, outlasts its source material. And that's when we start to see cracks in the armor. And that's because up until this point, the world of Westeros is so big that when a character says, I'm leaving this castle to go to the next castle, they don't get there for 2 episodes. They have a little mini adventure along the way because it's very dangerous out there. And then they arrive and have whatever confrontation they're going to have. And in season 7, they started bouncing characters around. And a guy is at a castle one day, and then 10 minutes later, he is across the ocean with Daenerys. I'm talking about Varys. And that was the first big moment of, wait a minute, what? How'd that guy get there? How long has it been? How long has it been? I don't know. Well, that's fine. We'll go on with it. And then it was even worse when Jon and his friends go beyond the wall to get the wildlings to help them. Then they get surrounded by the White Walkers. Now, they've been gone about 3 days. I'm fudging the numbers, but it's to prove my point because I don't know the actual numbers. But they're gone for a while, and they get surrounded by White Walkers. They get surrounded by White Walkers, and they're on an ice floe in the middle of a frozen lake, and they're all gonna die. And it's bravado filmmaking. It's exciting. It's expensive. The stakes are high, and it's riveting. And one of them then tells a guy to go back and get help, and he takes off running. He takes off running. Now, we know it's going to take him a while to get back to the wall. And once he gets to the wall, he then sends a raven to where Daenerys is staying. Then they cut back to the ice battle, and I'm not joking, when all seems lost, Daenerys shows up. And that was the big moment of, you guys have broken all the rules that have been set up in this show. And that's where we have problems. For the sake of story and excitement, you're sacrificing logic. And that's where we have a problem. Because I will fudge any number of things in the sake of a really riveting story. When Marty and Jennifer get in the DeLorean and go to 2015 and meet themselves, I let it go. Because if they get there and somebody goes, oh, Jennifer and Marty vanished 30 years ago and were never heard from again. Oh, yeah, because they got in a car and left. But instead, we see them in their house and we all just go, it's fine. Because without that, we don't have a story. But in a show like Game of Thrones, where the stakes are high, and it looks like they're going to die, and then she shows up like 2 hours later, it's unbelievable. It's ridiculous. And you're like, okay, that's a huge red flag that they're just rushing the story. They're just rushing it. Oh, I'm itching because of it. If I did that in one of my books and I handed it to Julie, my great friend who edits for me, she would go, Jeff, you just told the reader it takes 3 days to do this journey, and now that she's back with a dragon in like 2 hours? Well, it's exciting. But it's not real, man. Try again. We always go back to Misery when she goes, Rocket Man didn't get out of the cock-a-doodie car. You can't then show me next week that he got out of the car because you showed him going off the cliff in the car, and I came back because I want to see how he gets out of that, and then you cheated. You lied. And that's where we have problems, folks. This is what plagued nearly every episode of Westworld past the premiere, where everything that you've built up world-wise, you just change. You just change the rules. That's so frustrating for the viewer, especially with a show like Game of Thrones, where it's like, we're in love. We're having a relationship, and now you're cheating on me with bad plot and illogical moments. Oh, it's so frustrating. So frustrating. So, Game of Thrones ends in its 8th season, and the writers are in full control because George R. R. Martin doesn't have any source material for them. And so many things happen just because they happen. And you're so frustrated. And now if you go online and try to I didn't post my opinion. I'm waiting here because no one can argue. The only thing here is me and a microphone. And if you don't like me, turn me off. You win the argument by turning me off. That way everybody wins. But man, what a lazy, sloppy final season of Game of Thrones. Oh my God. And the end was so bad. Oh my God. So many what the hell moments. Jon Snow pledging his allegiance to Daenerys, and Daenerys turning into a crazy person. I mean, you all watched it, you know. But I'll give you this. I will never just give you well, I didn't like it because it was dumb. I would never say that. If Daenerys was going to become the Mad Queen, and that's fine. If that's what you're building to, I got no problem with that. Here's a woman, the whole series has killed anybody that got in her way. But they all deserved it. Except maybe the 2 knights that she killed on the battlefield who wouldn't bend the knee, right? But for the most part, she killed the slavers. She killed the people who tried to cheat her. She killed anybody who got in her way or tried to kill her. Why wouldn't we do that? Of course. But she would never just slaughter women and children for no reason. And you know how they justified it? They justified it in the previously on Game of Thrones, and they showed Daenerys standing there and played audio clips of her whole journey. But that's not a scene in the show. That's last week on Game of Thrones. You can't introduce a new plot point in a previously on segment. When I saw it, it boggled my mind. I don't think I've ever seen that, where they deliberately manipulate the previously on to set up a huge character turn in the upcoming episode without doing the legwork of that turn. Does that make sense? They showed one scene of Daenerys in her room looking all sad and frail. She didn't lash out at people. She killed Varys the spider, one of my favorite characters. When they killed Littlefinger, I've watched that scene about 25 times because I think it's brilliant. Because Littlefinger was a manipulator, a schemer, and he thought he was manipulating Sansa into turning against her own sister. And they played along because it allowed Littlefinger to be caught off guard. And when she turns and she goes, "My sister asked you a question," you can see on his face he is shocked. And that's the only way they got him. Because otherwise, he would have been out of Winterfell as fast as make your head spin to preserve his own life. So when they knock on Varys' door and he's writing a letter of treason and they march him down to his death, you go, well, this guy would have already been gone. He would have known they were coming for him. He would have known that she was preparing the dragon to roast him, and they would have knocked on the door and found a smoking candle that had just been blown out, and Varys has flown the coop. That's good storytelling. What they did was just wholesale slaughter of characters that won't make the finale. And that's a disservice to not only the characters, but the fans as well. And what a shame that a character that good goes out like that. And even mechanics-wise of the show, they showed soldiers standing around him, and then the dragon burst him into flame. Well, everybody else would have been burst into flame too. I mean, these are just silly plot points that nobody thinks about. And it seems as if the last season was just rushed. They just rushed it out, which is weird to think of something you work on for over a year or a year and a half. The books that I work on, every page is agonized over. And at the end, when I find a mistake, I get really pissed off because I thought I found them all. But they're usually pretty small. You know how many people see a television show while it's in production before it airs? Dozens. And nobody saw the coffee cup sitting in front of Daenerys? Nobody saw the Starbucks cup? During the production, Amelia Clark didn't go, oh, sorry, guys, I think there was a coffee cup in that shot. Let me move it for the next take. And it just makes it in? That's unforgivable. That's just bizarre. I mean, that makes no sense, especially since you can see the dailies immediately. Some of the movie mistakes are because they print and it takes a week to see the dailies, or, the dailies at the end are rough and nobody notices, and it's not till it's all done and it's too late. But with digital filmmaking, they could have erased that coffee cup 10 minutes before the show aired. How do I know that? Because they've already erased it from the on-demand episodes. It's already gone. Well, Jeff, it was an accident. I don't believe that. That's an accident that shouldn't have happened. With that many people? An accident of that high? Well, maybe it was a planned product placement so that Starbucks... Ooh, then that's even worse. Then I'm an idiot for watching. If you don't care enough about me, the viewer, to move a coffee cup from Starbucks out of Westeros, out of King's Landing, out of Winterfell, then you don't care about me as a viewer. Then it's whatever slop they serve out, you're going to like it, and you're going to ask for more. And you're going to buy the pop vinyls. Well, I'm not that guy. I love Back to the Future, but there's a bunch of Back to the Future stuff I don't like. Products, whatever that Rick and Morty is, I don't dig it. Family Guy did a lot of Back to the Future references. I don't like them. Because I don't like everything just because it's in my wheelhouse. Or supposedly. So whatever the coffee cup thing is, there's no winning. If it's an accident, it's your fault and you're an idiot. If it's product placement, it's even worse and you're an idiot. And you think I'm an idiot. In the last episode, there was a water bottle at the guy's feet. A water bottle. Are you kidding? Twice in 2 weeks, modern day products end up in your Game of Thrones episode? Somebody's asleep at the wheel here. That's just bad filmmaking. At the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, the movie that was supposedly going to wrap up all the Star Wars storylines, it opened with a 20-minute space battle. And I remember sitting there at about the 12-minute mark saying to myself, oh, he's out of story to tell. It's just pyrotechnics to keep me enthralled until credits roll. Because at the end of Sith, so many different things had to happen before the story could end. Anakin has to succumb to the dark side. Anakin has to become a dark Sith. Padme has to get pregnant. Padme has to give birth to Luke and Leia. Luke has to be taken by Ben Kenobi. Leia has to be taken by the Organas. R2 and 3PO have to have their memories wiped. Yoda has to go into hiding. This is a laundry list of things, and they're wasting 20 minutes on a gun battle that really has no significance to the story. Except it wiped Dooku out of the picture, right? But Game of Thrones did the same thing, where they're walking through King's Landing and showing you the devastation for these huge swaths of time. Why are we still here? Is there no other story to tell that we're still here? Okay, that's a story you want to tell? Okay, I'll go with it. The previous episode was a lot like 9/11 with Arya running around covered in soot and watching the devastation, and a girl that we just saw ninja-like kill the Night King. Hoo-yah! She jumps up and stabs. It's badass. A fantastic scene. Now she's whimpering and needs help, and she doesn't know where to go or what to do, and you're like, you don't even know Arya. And the actress playing her should have said, look, my character wouldn't do this. She just saved the world, and now she's afraid of rocks. Okay? And then Cersei and Jaime Lannister, the two characters that you love to hate and they're vile people, and they get knocked by rocks? Like, that's it? And the Hound and the Mountain die together? Oh. Well, this is just sloppy wrap-up. Oh, we're just going through the paces here. There's a list of characters on a page, and we're ticking off the boxes. Got that one done. Got that one done. Got that one done. There's never any confrontation between Daenerys and Cersei. Cersei isn't put on trial for her crimes. She doesn't have to answer for all the vile stuff she's done. This is a woman who blew up an entire building of people. An entire building of people was blown up by her to preserve her place, on the throne. It's a woman who watched her kids die, all of them. And there's no comeuppance or redemption or anything. It's just her and Jaime embrace, and you see his real hand. Another bad mistake. And then the ceiling falls. That's it? That's it. I mean, I haven't seen a character go out that badly since Captain Phasma in The Last Jedi. Oh, no. Hey, folks. Good characters deserve good endings, good deaths. Hell, Captain Kirk deserved a better death than the one he got in Generations. So now, in the last one, they're walking through all this rubble, and then, for some reason, Tyrion knows how to go exactly to where Cersei and Jaime are dead. And he's lifting rocks, and it's like, another rock, another rock, another rock, another rock. Oh, a gold hand, there he is. Oh, they're dead. That's it. And if you look, the rest of the room didn't collapse. So if Jaime and Cersei just moved to the right about 10 feet, they'd still be fine. Folks, this is sloppy. As sloppy as a water bottle. What a weird ending for a fantastic show. What a weird ending. And it's just sloppy filmmaking. I'll give you an example. Jon Snow comes across Grey Worm. He's about to execute prisoners in the street. They have a confrontation. Grey Worm says, the Queen told me to do this. And Jon goes, well, I'm going to go talk to the Queen. So Jon leaves, and behind him we see Grey Worm slitting the throats of the prisoners. We follow Jon in almost real time through the city, through the courtyard, past a sleeping dragon, up the stairs to where Daenerys is, and who's there with her? Grey Worm. Are you kidding me? Who made this? That guy was just slaughtering people in the streets, and now he's up here? This is where your brain loses it. Because even if you didn't recognize it like me, you're not a big nerd idiot like me, your brain still processed that guy is in two places at one time because of bad editing, bad filmmaking, bad storytelling, bad pacing. What a cheap way to go out. Daenerys, one of her dragons, gets killed by a guy with a big crossbow who can apparently shoot and reload and shoot and reload and aim like nobody's ever seen, except when the dragon's 30 feet from him. Then they can't hit him. It's just weird, illogical story choices. Illogical story choices. And the fire that the dragon breathes isn't fire. It's apparently like it's force, because they show the dragon shooting fire at the buildings, and instead of setting them on fire, it like blows them up. The force of the fire disintegrates the building. Okay, if that's what it does, it's a dragon. How do I know what it does? But I don't think we've ever seen that before. We've seen the dragon set ships on fire, but the dragon didn't shoot fire at the ship and have the ship blow up and sink. Maybe it did. I don't remember. But it just seemed weird. Like, boy, the dragon's tearing S up in this thing. And not just setting them on fire, like it's forced like a cannon. You know? And Cersei just stands there, sees the destruction, and then tries to escape, and then the building falls on her. And it's over. At the end of episode 7, Arya gets on a horse and rides off out of the city. Where's she going? I don't know. Well, we'll never know, because in episode 8, she's just walking around the city. What? You showed she was leaving. You put her on a horse. It was a big moment. It was like symbolism of death rides a pale horse. And then it's not a factor at all. It's as if episode 8 was made by different people than episode 7. And they didn't get to watch episode 7. Other than they said, well, the city got blown up. Okay. So Daenerys comes out and makes this Third Reich speech that she's going to conquer the world with all her remaining armies, and they're not going to stop until the whole world bends to her knee. The whole world, not just the 7 kingdoms now. Everybody. People we've never seen or met or heard of, they're going to be part of her reign. And then Tyrion walks up and she's like, you betrayed me. He's like, yeah. And after you made that speech about conquering everybody, I'm going to piss you off by throwing my collector pin down the stairs. And if she's the Mad Queen, guess what? And I was waiting for it. She would have just had Grey Worm slaughter him right there. Take his head off. Yes, my queen. And there's Tyrion's story ending. And instead she's like, lock him up. We'll deal with him later. And you're like, why? You're going to kill him now? I mean, later, why just kill him now? Oh, because Tyrion's going to survive. Okay, got it. So then Jon confronts Daenerys. She's going to take the throne for the, she never even sits on it. She just admires it. And then Jon stabs her. Because Tyrion told him that that's what he has to do. That he has to end her reign and it's over. And Daenerys Targaryen, who we have followed for 8 years from a piece of property to be shared to the grandest, most powerful woman ruler that world has ever seen. The mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, the freer of slaves. She just gets stabbed in a throne room and it's over. She doesn't look at Jon and go, I loved you, or have last words. Blood comes out her mouth and she's dead. It was very anticlimactic. Oh, God. And then the dragon shows up and it looks like it's going to roast Jon, and instead it melts the throne because the dragon somehow knows about metaphor, about symbols. The dragon doesn't see it as just another piece of metal. And if that's what you're going to do, that's great. But Jon should have turned the dragon and said, you're mine now. I am the father of dragons. And then got on the dragon and flown off. I mean, that would have been great, right? Because that scene of Daenerys with the dragon wings behind her is maybe one of the greatest moments the show has ever had. But they don't deliver on it. The torch isn't passed to Jon. Instead, they cut to like a month later where they're having some yo-yo council to decide who gets to be king. And Sam suggests democracy and they all laugh. And then Tyrion's brought by Grey Worm and told, we were here to die, not to talk. Okay, so he tells Tyrion, the guy who's run his mouth the whole show, that he is there to shut the hell up and not say a word. And Tyrion responds by giving a 10-minute speech about stories and who deserves to be king. Again, folks, this is your show. This is you. The guy with the sword and the spear just told you to shut up. And then he gives a big speech. And Grey Worm just stands there. And I'm like, oh, is he going to kill him? Because he told him to shut up. This is the guy who betrayed the queen. Jon Snow's in prison for doing it. These guys are both supposed to die, according to Grey Worm. And Grey Worm goes, shut up, but go ahead and talk. And then Jon Snow must go to the wall and never be seen again, but I'm going to leave on a boat, so you guys do what you want. Remember how in Return of the King, the movie just kept ending and ending and ending? And I was okay with that, because after spending 9 hours with these characters, I'm okay with 20 minutes more of wrapping it up. And instead, this one just cuts to the boom, boom, boom. Bran is king? What? Bran is king. Okay, whatever. Sansa is Queen of the North because the North is not part of the kingdoms anymore. Arya is going to sail off into nowhere. One guy's got a water bottle. The Unsullied are sailing off to their own. Jon Snow is going to go back to the wall. Like, you ever seen The Great Escape? I love The Great Escape. And it opens with Steve McQueen in prison throwing a ball. And then they have this 3-hour adventure to get out, and it ends with Steve McQueen throwing a ball against the wall. That's the Jon Snow story. 3 hours of storytelling to get right back where we were. But Kit Harington is not Steve McQueen. He gets his dog. I mean, that almost seemed like something they threw in on Tuesday after the aftermath of last episode, where he didn't say goodbye to his dog, because that's apparently the most important thing in the world. I mean, the dog is important, the wolf, the dire wolf, I get it, but it now is a major plot point that the wolf has to go with him into the north. Well, why is there a wall anyways? Why is there a Night's Watch, a King's Watch? Because there's no White Walkers anymore, and the wildlings who live north of the wall are all our friends now. Maybe the last episode should have been them dismantling the wall and uniting the kingdoms of men and women together. How much more satisfying would that ending have been? You know, of them using the dragon to melt the entire wall and watching the men of the King's Watch partner up with the wildlings for families and to start a life with a wife and a family and children. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. You know, and to end it on hope. And then cut to, you know how Conan ends with Conan on the throne? That's such a great ending. End it with Jon Snow smoking a pipe and watching his children frolic in a free yard that he helped give to them. Oh, that would have been good. Jeff, you have to review the movie you got, not the one you wanted. I know, but it's not bad to dream. And you know, there's a petition for a do-over, which is just stupid. We're done. The sets for Game of Thrones were dismantled a year ago. This show's been in the can forever. We're all done. We're all done. And it just ends. The dragon's off to this north. I mean, they spent untold minutes of Tyrion straightening chairs. What? The minute it's happening, I'm like, I don't understand what's happening. He's straightening chairs? Okay, whatever. And then that awful character, I think his name is Bronn, the one who threatened Jaime and Tyrion with a crossbow. Like, somehow he materializes inside the castle with a crossbow, threatening them. And now he's like master of coin? That guy should have been put to death immediately. Or he should have joined forces with them instead of threatening with a crossbow. He should have said, you know, Cersei sent me to kill you, but... Okay, cool. He's master of coin? Whatever. And then in one of the most embarrassing moments of the entire show, Sam shows up with a book called A Song of Ice and Fire. That's so weird, you know. That's their there and back again moment. And, you know, I guess if you're going to crib, you crib from the best, but it just came off as forced. It really did, you know. And they showed Brienne putting the last pages of Jaime's history in the Book of Nights. That's all right. I get it. She should have blown on the ink to set it before she turned the page or closed the book. But, you know, that's just, again, that's the writer in me. Physically, the writer in me. But the show just sort of went out with a whimper, not a bang. And I'm not saying it has to have a bang, because the Game of Thrones people were always clear that the episode before the last was always the big one. That's the Battle of the Bastards. That's the Battle of something Bay, the one where Tyrion used the dragon fire to kill everybody. It's always the one before. Then the last episode's usually just talking, and I'm okay with that, because the greatest moments of Game of Thrones to me are not action sequences. They're conversations between characters. They're moments that matter. And it seemed like they squandered a lot of their moments, that their mattered moments, if that makes sense. So, hey, if you love Game of Thrones, you thought the ending was satisfactory, that's great. I'm jealous of you. I want to be you. But when Grey Worm is in two places at once and then some guy's got a water bottle, it's indication that somebody's asleep at the wheel. And I'm not mad. I don't get mad about movies. I'm just like, disappointed. It's over. I guess that ended. I can get on with my life. Okay. I'll watch some of the other episodes, because the Battle of the Bastards episode is fantastic. When Ramsay Bolton gets eaten by his own dogs, that's top-notch storytelling. It's been set up. We know it's coming, and when it happens, we're shocked, even though we know it's coming. So I applaud the makers of Game of Thrones for an ambitious and stunning series. It was fantastic. So they whiffed the ending. What are you going to do? Were they going to please everybody with an ending? No. They pleased some. That's okay. That's a good percentage. They're moving on to Star Wars now. So whatever. I don't know. No one's given me a job in the movies to write, so I write my own. And those are the 6th Key book series on Amazon.com. So until the Game of Thrones prequels show up, we're done. And so am I. I didn't mean to piss you off with this episode. Apparently you're not allowed to criticize anything anymore. Again, if the chef brings you burnt food, you're the problem for not eating it. I'm Jeff Tucker. This is 91 Reasons.
Thanks for listening to 91 Reasons. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Find us on Facebook. Is anyone even still listening?